Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Place Show, your most trusted horse racing podcast that is proudly part of the Amalfi Media Network. Here at the Win Place Show, I focus on race previews, recaps, and interviews with figures from across the horse racing industry, in addition to so much more. Today, I wanted to take a break from doing weekly race previews. Don't worry, those will be back next week for the Pennsylvania Derby. But I wanted to spend this week to look ahead at the slate of Breeders' Cups races that are going to be taking place the first weekend in November at Del Mar. Now, before we get to that, just a quick reminder to be on the lookout for the Win Place Show podcast to appear on the podcast platform of your choice starting next Tuesday, September 21st. We'll continue to post all of our race previews and interviews on YouTube, but there's going to be a lot of content that will only be on the podcast, so make sure to subscribe and follow next week when the podcast launches. Additionally, head over to amalfimedia.com for all of our great content that covers horse racing. And listen, this Friday, I'm going to have a blog up for the picks at Laurel Park in Maryland on Saturday, so you want to make sure to check that out. But also, we have stuff on history, politics, pop culture, movies, cooking, finance, and so much more. We really do have something for everyone. So even if horse racing isn't your bag, or you have a wife or a spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend, kids who are into different things, turn them on to amalfimedia.com because we really do have a lot for everyone. And all of our content is free of charge. There's no paywall on the site. And that's something that we promise to continue. But it also does take a lot of time and money to make the world turn and to churn out all of the content that we do. So when you're on amalfimedia.com, you'll occasionally see links where you're able to provide a one-time, weekly, or monthly donation if you're so inclined. And of course, we are deeply, deeply appreciative of your support if you choose to do so. And listen, maybe you read my Kentucky Downs blog last week and played the Superfecta in race 5 that I called and hit the $17,000 on a $2 bet. Yeah, that happened, folks. I nailed that Superfecta last week, and 2 long shots in the right order, first and third, and then I called the top 4 right. So I was very fortunate. But maybe you also trusted me in a few of the graded stakes races, Max Player at Saratoga, and so maybe you made a little bit of profit there. And as I always like to joke, Bill Murray in Caddyshack says, how about a little something for the effort? So, like I said, if you're so inclined, we're, of course, deeply, deeply appreciative of any donation that you choose to give. But listen, we're always going to be a free site. We're always going to keep churning out that content. And the Win Place Show is where you can get all of your horse racing content and information for the Breeders' Cup and beyond. Okay, let's dive into the premier races in the United States, which are the Breeders' Cup, taking place on Friday, November 5th and Saturday, November 6th at Del Mar, where the surf meets the turf in sunny Southern California. Now, something that I want to talk about, and the reason I wanted to do this, about 7 weeks before the actual races, is because the fields are not yet fully set, but we do have some idea of the horses that are going to be in the different Breeders' Cups races. And this is because of the win and you're in system that the Breeders' Cup set up. There are 84 win and you're in races, where if a horse wins a race, they are automatically entered into a certain division, which we'll go over all the divisions, but they're entered into a certain division of the Breeders' Cup races. Doesn't matter if that horse was a 50-1 long shot or the even money favorite. You win, you're in. And so we've already had 50 of those 84 races run. So we've already had a good number of horses that have already been slated in to these different Breeders' Cup competitions. There are still 34 to go, though. So even though we're only about 7 weeks out, here in mid-September to the beginning of November, we still have quite a few win and you're in races to go, including 10 at Keeneland. Keeneland's season opens up here in the beginning of October, and they are stacked with a lot of Breeders' Cup prep races And obviously those 10 win and you're in races, also a whole lot out at Santa Anita, a few at Belmont, a few across the pond actually over in France as well. So a lot of great racing that still has yet to go between now and November. Now, I just want to make note, I mentioned that the races for the Breeders' Cup are on Friday and Saturday. Friday is devoted to the juveniles, the 2-year-olds. Now, most of the win and you're in 2-year-old races have not yet taken place because those 2-year-olds are just really starting to round into form. So I'm not going to go over those juvenile races yet because the fields are really still pretty up in the air. But rest assured that some of the promising 2-year-olds you've seen, like Wit, Gunnet, Pinehurst, American Experiment, these are horses that are going to end up in those different fields for the juvenile on Friday. You're going to see all of your heavy hitters of those 2-year-olds, and I think it's a really strong 2-year-old crop, actually. I'm really fascinated by it. And there's some interesting implications for the Kentucky Derby next year based upon some of the decisions made by Churchill Downs regarding Bob Baffert and any trainers suspended from Churchill not accumulating points to qualify for next year's Kentucky Derby. So some of those names that I just mentioned might be, particularly Pinehurst, who is trained by Baffert, might end up being trained by someone else if they want to have a run for the roses. So now, just to be clear, win and you're in races are not the only way to qualify for the Breeders' Cup. Horses can also accumulate points. And I want to put up a graphic here real quick that shows you how they can accumulate points, but they can do so by winning, placing, and showing in graded stakes races. And as you'll see, depending on the grade of the race, grade 1, 2, and 3, you get a certain amount of points allocated for winning, placing, and showing. Obviously, with grade 1 races having 10 points for a win, 6 points for a place, 4 points for a show. And then you see, as you go down to grade 2 and grade 3, those point values are reduced for winning, placing, and showing. So horses are able to accumulate those points. Now, just because you accumulate a lot of points doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get selected, but it certainly helps your case. Additionally, trainers can pre-enter horses into multiple fields and then decide, because horses may have a lot of points and maybe they're interested in maybe running a mile. Maybe they're interested in running a mile and a quarter. Maybe they're interested in running, 7 furlong sprint versus a 5 furlong sprint. So you're able to pre-enter horses on multiple fields. And then decide closer to the day of the race which one you actually want to enter. Therefore, just because a horse may have won a win and you're in race for a particular division doesn't mean that horse will end up running in that division. That's an important thing to point out. That we're going to see a couple of horses that have qualified for certain divisions. They might not end up running in that division because the trainers might actually move that horse to a different division, a different race to compete at a different length. Usually not on a different surface, but typically on a different length. Sometimes you will also see the fillies and mares choosing to run against the boys, so to speak. We'll see if that ends up happening this year. But particularly distance is a big factor here. Are they going to go to the mile and a quarter for the classic? Are they going to do a dirt mile? Are they going to, like I said, do 5 furlongs, 7 furlongs, etc.? So, we'll see. But there are a lot of horses that are outstanding horses that may not have won a win and you're in race, but will clearly have enough points to qualify and be selected for a quote-unquote at-large bid in some of the more prestigious races. And again, that's another thing where perhaps a horse has qualified for a less prestigious race through the win and you're in, but has accumulated enough points to be an at-large bid at a more prestigious race. So that's something trainers and owners have to weigh the cost-benefit analysis there. Is it worth going up against maybe a stronger field in a more prestigious race with a higher purse? Or do you, maybe take a step down, so to speak, and run a race that you maybe feel a little bit more confident in? Maybe it doesn't have quite the glitz and glamour. Maybe it doesn't have quite the purse. Don't worry, everybody's going to be very rich if they win these. All these purses are quite wealthy. But these are the calculations that owners and trainers are making. So with those explanations and disclaimers covered, I want to take a look at the horses that have qualified for the different divisions in the Breeders' Cup. And again, this is just based on the when and you're in and which division they automatically qualified for by winning that particular race. And again, this is not necessarily where they're going to end up. And I'll call that out when I see it, if I know or have a good sense of that taking place. So let's start with the granddaddy, so to speak, the crown jewel, the Longinus Breeders' Cup Classic. So the Longinus Classic is 1.25 miles on dirt for 3-year-olds and up. And this is, sponsorship aside, this is the Breeders' Cup Classic. I mean, this is the Breeders' Cup main race. And so let's take a look at the horses that have already qualified for this field. You'll see Cafe Faro, who is trained by Noriyuki Hori, won the February Stakes back in February, actually, so quite a while ago. Maxfield, trained by Brendan Walsh, won the Stephen Foster. Max Player is a horse that's actually won 2 win-and-you're-in races, trained by Steve Asmussen, won the Suburban, also won just recently the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Called that race, by the way. So that was a nice little profit there. I think it went off at 9-2. It was, I think, the 3rd betting line favorite. So not a bad day for me. Then you see a couple of Brad Cox horses, Mandaloon and Knicks Go. Mandaloon winning the Haskell Stakes via disqualification, but still winning. And then Knicks Go winning the Whitney in very impressive fashion. Now, Knicks Go, this is the fascinating one. We'll see where Knicks Go ends up going. Might end up actually dropping down to that mile distance. I mean, Knicks Go is a fast horse, and Knicks Go's got one strategy, which is I'm going to blitz the field, and I'm going to run my race, and I'm going to run as fast as possible and just wear everybody out so nobody's got anything in the tank when they can come and challenge me. Now, Knicks Go, you start pushing Knicks Go out in terms of distance, that's, you open yourself up to some issues there. I think Brad Cox knows that. Mandaloon's a horse that can probably handle the distance much better. Does he want 2 of his better horses going up against each other in this race? Does he move Knicks Go down to a different division, to the dirt mile? I think that's where you're going to see some finagling potentially going on. You also then have Mistrif, great horse that won the Judmonte International Stakes, trained by John Gostin. And then Tripoli, a really nice horse that I liked going into the TVG Pacific Classic that ended up winning that race, trained by John Sadler. So that is the Breeders' Cup Classic. And now I want to flip over, because those are a lot of familiar names, and some of the names you didn't see are going to be in that race. Don't worry. Essential Quality is going to be in that race. Hot Rod Charlie is going to be in that race. Midnight Bourbon is going to be in that race. And you said Medina Spirit is probably going to be in that race. So there's going to be a lot of horses that are very familiar that are going to be in that race for the Breeders' Cup Classic. They just happen not to have won the win-and-you're-in races. And you might say, why is the Kentucky Derby not a win-and-you're-in race? I don't know. That's politics for another day. But the bottom line is those horses are going to end up being in that race if they're sound and if they're tuned up and ready to go. So don't worry, you'll see all those big names in the 3-year-old division be in that classic race. So let's flip over to the Longinus Turf Breeders' Cup Classic. And that's 1.25 miles on turf, obviously, for 3-year-olds and up. And this is a race where maybe not quite as many familiar names. And you'll see a lot of parentheses behind these horse names because these are horses that are coming from overseas. And so Cool Day, Argentinian horse trained by Alvaro Soto, won the Gran Premio International Carlos Pellegrini. And then Love, the Aidan O'Brien horse, has won the Prince of Wales Stakes. And Love's an interesting horse. Has not run well the last 2 times out. This was a horse that was dominant last year. Won the Prince of Wales Stakes first time out this year and has proceeded to lose the next 2 out. Love is also a horse that does not like a firm surface. I got bad news for Love. Southern California doesn't rain that much. That turf is going to be nice and firm for that race. So that'll be interesting to see what Aidan O'Brien does out there. Sometimes he's held Love out of races if the turf isn't to his liking. So we'll see. Chronogenesis, Japanese horse trained by Takashi Saito. And then you have Adiyar, another great horse, trained by Charles Appleby, actually beat Love at the King George VI, Queen Elizabeth Kipco Stakes. Astronaut. This was a long shot that I actually really liked quite a bit at the Del Mar Handicap. I can't say I picked Astronaut to win. I did have him on the board, but trained by John Sheriffs. I like this horse quite a bit. And then Gufo. You might remember if you watched my interview with Naira and Fox Sports' Acacia Courtney. She's engaged to Christoph Clement's son, and so she's very excited about Gufo winning the Sword Dancer that was on Whitney weekend, and so she was rooting for Gufo going into that race, and so it's great to see that horse win in impressive fashion too. And then just last weekend, we had a pair of horses qualify for this field. Imperador, an Argentinian horse, won down at Kentucky Downs, the Calumet Turf Cup. And then St. Mark Basilica's French horse, again, also trained by Aidan O'Brien, won the Irish Champion Stakes. We'll see where they all end up. Does Aidan O'Brien want to have multiple horses? He's going to end up having multiple horses in all these turf divisions. If you've watched my show, if you're familiar with turf racing, Chad Brown is probably the preeminent American trainer for turf horses. It's not uncommon to see Chad Brown have 2 or 3 entries in major turf races. Same thing is true for Aidan O'Brien. Not uncommon for you to see Aidan have multiple entries. And now even his son has had some very, big success in some graded stakes races in the United States on turf as well. What you don't see here are a couple of other Aidan O'Brien winners. You don't see Bolshoi Ballet or Santa Barbara. Both of those horses are going to end up being in either this race or one of the other turf classics. And then Charles Appleby's got a couple of horses that are very impressive in Summer Romance and Althika. They're probably going to end up in one of these turf races as well. They have more than enough points to qualify and are very classy horses. So that'll be interesting to see the battle of these trainers. So moving on from the classic turf race, going to the Longinus Distaff, and this is a 1.8 miles, and this is for the fillies and mares. And at this point, we only really see 3 horses in this field. Part of the reason we only see 3 horses in this field is because one horse has chosen to win 3 of the Win and You're In races. And that horse is, of course, Latruska. Latruska, who is ranked by the Breeders' Cup to be the number 7 overall horse in the country right now, an overall horse in the world. I've had multiple guests on this show that have told me Latruska is the best horse. And I think it just depends on, are you racing these horses against each other or just looking at how dominant a horse is within their division? If you're looking at the latter, then it's hard to make an argument against Latruska being the best horse in the country. But not to slight the other horses in this race, you do have Blue Stripe, an Argentinian horse trained by Nicholas Martin Ferro, won a graded stakes race earlier this year. Then you have Latruska, who won the Ogden Phipps Handicap, the Fleur-de-Lis Stakes, and the Personal Ensign. Very impressive. And then you have Brad Cox's a horse, She Dares the Devil. This is a good horse. It's a really good horse that I think doesn't get a ton of respect because of how much respect people pay to Latruska, and appropriately so. But sometimes it is difficult to be that kind of second best horse in a division when you have such a dominant champion. And, it's a little bit, for those of you who may be golf fans, it's the Tiger Woods effect. When Tiger was at his peak, he just kind of sucked up all the air in the room and nobody else talked about anybody, the other golfers, even though there were some great golfers going on at the same time. Same thing is true in basketball. When Michael Jordan was winning championships, people weren't talking about the greatness of Charles Barkley or Karl Malone or Reggie Miller or these other players that were his contemporaries because they were so overwhelmed by one player. And the same thing's happening here a little bit with Latruska and She Dares the Devil. But that should end up being a very strong race because there's some very, very good fillies and mares that are out there. And there are still quite a few more Win and You're In races in this division. So let's move to one of the other turf races, and this is where you might see some other Aidan O'Brien, Charles Appleby entries. I mentioned Bolshoi Ballet, Santa Barbara earlier. I also mentioned Althea, some are Romance. Since this is for fillies and mares, you might end up seeing some of them in this particular field. And so, but you already have this field filling out pretty nicely. And again, only one American horse, Warlike Goddess, trained by Bill Mott. But you have Queen Supreme, trained by Mike DeCock. And then you have Gran Allegria, Japanese horse, trained by Kazuo Fujisawa. Then you have Reina de Molendo, trained by Luis Oliveras. Snowfall, another Japanese horse, trained by Aidan O'Brien. The aforementioned Warlike Goddess, who just recently won the Flower Bowl. And then No Speak Alexander, who also just recently won the Justify Matron Stakes. It's going to be a fascinating race because there's a lot of really good distant turf horses this year. I feel like you've seen a lot of those really strong races at Saratoga this year with that field, particularly on the fillies and mare side and the female side of the division. So it'll be interesting to see how this field continues to fill out over the coming weeks and how these different trainers decide to use their entries and place their different horses. And of course, the owners have a great deal of influence on all of this as well. So let's start actually going down in distance a little bit, and let's go to the FanDuel Mile. And this is a fascinating division because, as I mentioned, this is a division. Now, this is a turf race, the FanDuel Mile. The next one that I'll talk about, the Dirt Mile, is where you might end up seeing Nixco end up moving. But for this one, it's a mile on turf for 3-year-olds and up. Jet Dark, South African horse. You don't see many of those, but South African horse trained by Justin Snaith. Successo, Chilean horse trained by Patricio Beza. Smooth Like Straight, nice horse trained by Mike McCarthy. He's run out at Del Mar quite a bit, won the Shoemaker Mile. Dan and Kingley, a Japanese horse trained by Kiyoshi Hagiwara. And then Palace Pier, British horse, trained by John Gostin, won the Queen Anne Stakes, and then won the longest titled race I've ever seen in my life, the Prix du Horace de Fresnay La Bouffarde Jacques Lamoureux. That's the name of one race. I pity the track announcer. Leave it up to the French to make a title that long. Bottom line is, though, Palace Pier is a really good horse, and John Gostin's a very, very good trainer. And then you see two intriguing horses, Alcohol Free, an Irish horse trained by Mark Casse, and Got Stormy, also trained by Mark Casse, who won the 4-star Dave just recently. Finished a little bit disappointing at Kentucky Downs in a race in the Turf Cup recently, but we will see how Mark Casse ends up moving his horses around in this division. I'd be mildly surprised if we see Got Stormy run this race. She might get moved down to the sprint. We'll end up seeing. But I have a feeling that he's going to want to separate these two so he doesn't have them going up against each other in this race. But it could be wrong. Now, let's then move to the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile. And you heard me right. That's the name of the race, the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile. Mile on dirt, 3-year-olds and up. We got 2 horses in this race. That's it. We got Silver State by Steve Asmussen, who won the Hillendale Metropolitan Handicap, and we got Ginobili, trained by Richard Baltus, who won the Pat O'Brien Stakes out west. Listen, there's going to be a ton of more horses in this field, obviously. What's fascinating about mile races is that, unlike most other divisions, there are some horses that are just milers. You see this in track and field actually quite a bit. There are some people who are they run a mile. That's their shtick. That's their gimmick. That's what they do. And I don't mean to degrade that. Me running a mile is a hot mess. But, these horses, there are some horses, when you look at their past performances, man alive, they are milers. You push them above a mile? Nope. You run them below a mile? Nope. You run them at a mile? They're golden. There are some horses that are just like that a mile really is their sweet spot. And every horse does tend to have their sweet spot. I don't mean to overstate things, but mile is an interesting number. It's a round number, and obviously it attracts a certain type of horse. What's fascinating about this is I wouldn't be surprised if you get a lot of horses who actually take a step down in distance, who are typically running a 1 1/8, maybe even a 1 3/16, maybe even a 1 1/4 sometimes, who feel like they're going to maybe they don't want to compete against the very top end of the Breeders' Cup Classic and they take a step down to run the dirt mile. And when I say step down, that's, again, overstating things. You're not really taking a step down. These are all champion horses. These are outstanding horses. This is going to be a difficult field to handicap come November, but it'll be interesting to see how you see whether or not you'll get a lot of milers, so to speak, in this race, or whether or not you get a lot of horses cutting back in distance and running a mile. I usually, from a handicapping standpoint, like to see those horses that cut back in distance. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. Now we move to the sprints, and there are 3 sprint races. The Breeders' Cup Sprint is 6 furlongs on dirt for 3-year-olds and up. And again, you only have 2 horses in this field currently. Mind Control, trained by Todd Pletcher, and Dr. Chevelle, trained by Mark Glatt, that won the Bing Crosby Stakes. I really like Dr. Chevelle. Flavien Prat gave that horse a phenomenal ride in that race. Just did a great job. And that horse just keeps getting faster too. I really like that horse quite a bit. So Dr. Chevelle, like I said, really good horse. You're going to see this loaded up with a lot of other horses. This is where horses like Mischievous Alex are probably going to end up. This is where a horse like Lexitonian's probably going to end up. This is where your premier sprint horses are going to end up in this field. So it might look like 2 horses right now, and you go, well, I don't know about this field. It's going to end up being a stacked field. There's some outstanding sprint horses that we've seen in the United States in particular at Saratoga and Del Mar run this summer. So this is going to end up being a very, very strong field. You're going to end up seeing a lot of at-large bids here. And there are quite a few additional win-and-you're-in races for the sprint division when we move into the fall at Keeneland and Belmont and Santa Anita. But let's move into the turf sprint, another very strong field. And this is where, again, you'll see, I think, some moving around potentially, or some horses that maybe I've already mentioned end up moving into this field. A horse like Got Stormy, we'll see. Maybe a horse like Casa Creed, this very first horse, trained by Bill Mott. Does Casa Creed, who runs against Got Stormy quite a bit, does Casa Creed move up to a mile? Does Got Stormy move down to the turf sprint? We'll end up seeing what happens, because these 2 horses run against each other quite a bit. Has run against each other, I believe, 3 or 4 times already this year. So we'll see if they continue to duel down the stretch. Then you have Dream of Dreams, Irish horse trained by Michael Stout. Winter Power, another Irish horse trained by Tim Easterby. Then Gear Jockey, trained by George Arnold II. And Romantic Proposal, an Irish horse trained by Edward Lyman. So that's going to be another fascinating thing to see. And one of the things to keep in mind when you're thinking about this long term in terms of the Breeders' Cup turf races, as I mentioned earlier, these turf races are on firm turf. European horses tend not to be very accustomed to running on firm turf. Tends to be a little bit more softer, good to soft to even yielding sometimes. So you see very different turf conditions over in Europe, and horses over there are much more comfortable running in those conditions. Now, that said, European horses have come over to the United States this year and just smacked around the American turf division. As I've mentioned a bunch of names already, the Bolshoi Ballets and the Santa Barbaras and the Alficas and the Summer Romances. And these horses have come over and just laid waste to a lot of the American competition. So it'll be interesting to see how these European horses hold up on the California turf, which again is going to be well manicured beautifully. It's going to look like a golf course, but it's going to be firm. Southern California doesn't rain a lot, so that's what you're going to end up seeing. And now let's go to the very last one, which is the Filly and Mare Sprint, 7 furlongs on turf for 3-year-olds. Again, only 2. You have CC, trained by Mike McCarthy, who won the Princess Rooney. And then finally, Gamine, trained by Bob Baffert, and won the Kettle One Ballerina. Now, I have a little star by Gamine, and the reason I have that, and it's the only horse that has a star out of all the horses we covered, is because Gamine won this race last year. So is Gamine going to try to go back-to-back at the Filly and Mare Sprint? It would be an amazing accomplishment to win back-to-back Breeders' Cup Classics, Breeders' Cup races in this particular division. So we'll see. We'll also see what happens with Bob Baffert. That's going to be kind of a big question mark coming down the stretch. As I mentioned, Churchill Downs has made it very clear, passed a rule that said any trainer that is suspended from entering a horse at the Kentucky Derby will not earn points in the races leading up to the Kentucky Derby for horses to be eligible. That's got to put the owners in a tough position. Do you want your horse to continue to be trained by Bob Baffert and basically forego the Kentucky Derby, which is the, biggest event from a consumer standpoint in American sports racing? So what do you want to do if you're the owner of Pinehurst, who just looked incredibly impressive last time out as a really strong 2-year-old trained by Bob Baffert? What are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and keep your horse in Baffert's barn or not? Now, there's a lot of wiggle room around those things. Bob Baffert's got a lot of assistant trainers that could take over training these horses. The question, though, is will the Breeders' Cup do anything? Even between now and November, will the Breeders' Cup do anything regarding Baffert? That'll be fascinating to see and something to keep an eye on. Again, in the short term, Baffert's got a lot of assistant trainers he could move horses to underneath him, essentially, where he is no longer the trainer, but, essentially they would still stay in roughly the same barn. We'll see if that ends up happening. We have seen some high-profile horses moving from Baffert to people like Todd Pletcher, Steve Asmussen, Chad Brown, and others. So that's a possibility too. But the bottom line is this is going to be a thrilling beginning of November. I can't wait for the Breeders' Cup. I can't wait for these additional win-and-you're-in races. Now, that's it for today. But remember, there are still 34 win-and-you're-in races to go. And based upon my calculations at the schedule, I'm going to be doing previews for at least 17 of them, and maybe as many as 25. I'm going to be doing all the Keeneland races. I'm going to be doing all the Santa Anita races. Might even throw in a few of these Belmont races. If I feel particularly, frisky, I might try to handicap a race over in the French Gallop. We'll see. I don't know that, I did okay when I went over to England and handicapped the King George VI Queen Elizabeth Stakes. We'll see if I have much luck over in France. But listen, make sure to continue to follow the Win Place Show podcast on your podcast platform of choice starting next Tuesday for all the content you need for the Sport of Kings. And also subscribe to Amalfi Media on YouTube to continue to get my video race previews and interviews. Additionally, head over to amalfimedia.com, get all of our content, including my Saturday picks and analysis for the races at Laurel Park in Maryland. And like I said, if you win a couple bucks and you want to say thank you, feel free to give a one-time weekly or monthly donation at amalfimedia.com to help us continue to turn out all of the great content that you need to get through the Breeders' Cup and beyond. Well, friends, until next time, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.